Hi everybody, my name is Alex and I welcome you to a new episode of DeepTech. Today we are going to discuss cryptocurrency, or more specifically, privacy coins. In order to have this discussion, I have a guest. He's not a rocket scientist, he's not a marine biologist, he's not even an astronaut. But when it comes to cryptocurrency, he knows his stuff. I welcome Jean-Michel Azzopardi, the CCO of Infrinity. Hello, my friend.
Hi, how's it going?
Very good, thank you.
Good.
All right, you're the one of the biggest experts I know in cryptocurrency. So I thought that it'd be interesting to discuss privacy coins because this is a technology show, so we want to discuss more the technology aspect of the cryptos and not how well they're doing currently. So I'd like to know, in your opinion, what's the difference between a privacy coin and a non-privacy coin?
Okay, so peeling back the layers a little bit, let's go back to a blockchain. And the whole purpose of a blockchain is to sort of have some kind of peer-to-peer network. And you hear you often hear the term transparent being thrown around into that mix, right? And that's basically because every record on a blockchain is accessible through some kind of web app, usually that ends up linking in directly to the chain. So for like Ether, there's Eatscan. So you can just go on Eatscan, you can enter like a wallet address, for example, and you can see a full list of transaction history specifically for that wallet. Now, in the case of a privacy coin, that process is entirely construed. So you still have that peer-to-peer element without the idea of transparency.
So how can we say that a privacy coin is actually secure in the sense where they're securing all the transactions if there is no transparency? And I would say that this could apply specifically in coins which are pre-mined. Does that have an effect on them?
I mean, whether the coins are pre-mined or not would have, I think both points which you mentioned sort of link back to the idea of whether the project itself is safe and makes sense. So there are projects out there like Monero, which is probably like the world's most famous privacy coin, and you can trust that because it sort of stood the test of time in its own way. There are other coins which have some sort of pre-mining out of the box that are actually that actually makes sense. So take, for example, Cardano, the treasury system and the way that functions. That involves a couple of pre-mined coins being assigned to this treasury to be able to cater for sort of a couple of network functions. But just because you have pre-mined coins, it doesn't necessarily mean that something's bad, but it probably does. If that makes sense.
Yes, so I asked that question because I'm thinking, for example, of Bytecoin, BYTECOIN, which was based on the CryptoNote technology. And it was discovered that although they had released their white paper in 2013, the coin was actually released in 2012, and 82% of those coins were actually secretly pre-mined. Afterwards, for the rest, you can actually mine the coins yourself out of a PC. So, when you think about Bytecoin, why would we think that, we know that was not legitimate, but Monero is?
Okay, so and before I sort of go any further, there's gazillion different cryptos out there, and the only way you're going to have a bit of background on each one is if you do your DD or due diligence specifically on that token. Otherwise, there's no way to keep track of all the developments out there. So we had a little heads up prior to this conversation, just to sort of make things clear to the audience out there. And Bytecoin, the biggest issue with Bytecoin was that the founders were pseudonyms, so they weren't actually real people. So if you've got sort of like PhD holders and sort of high achievers, and yet you can't find any of their information on LinkedIn, you can't find any job history, you can't find any Google results to prove that this person is actually legit, that's a red flag. If the white paper has got a bunch of terminology that sounds really salesy and for the most part doesn't mean much, that's another red flag, right? Like I don't know, I heard of a term one time I read in some BS white paper called super mining or something like that. It's just like, it means nothing.
Well, here we're talking about actually explaining what's the utility of the coin. So we know that, for example, or I'm going to ask you, were privacy coins initially created to give anonymity to people doing transactions in places such as the Silk Road?
No. The Silk Road was the Silk Road's primary monetary vector was Bitcoin and ETH, but mostly BTC. Why? Because most other tokens just pretty much weren't in use back then. And in fact, when the FBI seized all the coins that they owned, that the Silk Road owned, I mean, it was like the Silk Road basically wasn't holding any privacy coins. It was just BTC. So post the Silk Road collapse, that brought about the rise of privacy coins. And to add to that, a little fun fact is basically whenever you make any kind of transaction on any kind of blockchain network, there's some kind of transaction fee, right?
Correct.
And you can manually set that transaction fee. So if you log onto like an app like Coinbase, for example, they're going to set it for you. Like every time you need to make a trade, assuming it's a cross-chain transaction. But with BTC, there's actually kind of like there's an Easter egg amount that you can peg as a transaction fee that will make your transaction entirely anonymous.
Okay.
So it basically like sends over the BTC from wallet to wallet, but instead of going from one to one, goes from one, breaks it up into numerous different wallets, then obfuscates it and sends it up to one at the other end without you knowing. Sort of like Tor, just on a sort of blockchain idea.
But does that mean that, for example, law enforcement wouldn't be able to trace those transactions? They could potentially do it, but it would take a considerable amount of time and resources. Exactly,
and you'd break things like you'd break KYT tools, know your transaction tools like Cipher, Trace, Elliptic, and Chainalysis.
Wow. So that was my next question, was taking me there. Privacy coins. If we need to convert them to fiat, at that moment, do we lose the privacy factor?
It depends where you're converting your fiat into. If you're converting it into an account that's domiciled in the country in which you live or are from or have some kind of relation to, then yes, I suppose you are. But if you liquidate them into some place in the Cayman Islands, for example, yes, you're breaking that anonymity because you're sort of adding funds into the system.
Yeah, but when we're talking about markets like Bitcoin, not Bitcoin, when we're talking about markets such as Binance or Kraken or Coinbase that has now been listed on the stock market, we can assume that these big names are going to play along with whatever requests comes from the regulators concerning KYC, for example, and potentially reporting. But I don't see how a company like Binance is going to start reporting transactions to every country about every citizen of that country that's making a transaction on their platform.
Look, Binance, to the best of my knowledge at least, aren't regulated anywhere.
No, it seems to me that the only reason why they actually do KYC is to increase the limits of the minimum transactions that you can do. So for example,
Yes.
if you should prove your identity, you could do 2 Bitcoin transactions. But then if you show a proof of address, you could go to 100 Bitcoin. But what's the use of having this KYC process if anyways there's no purpose behind it to check the legitimacy of the funds and inform regulators?
I mean, first of all, it's like, I think it's less of a regulatory issue and more of an internal de-risking issue, right? Like if I can sign you up and you can prove who you are by sending me a copy of your ID and a copy of your address, and then I know that your account is specifically linked to you, and I know that you can't have 1,000 accounts, so I can sort of monitor and put whatever kind of thresholds and limitations I want on your specific account. As far as regulatory requirements from governmental side, things like proof of funds and stuff like that, that's a completely different kind of worms, right?
Yeah, I figured that they would probably want this information because it would allow them to defend themselves in case they were investigated for some issue and say, oh, well, we did our due diligence and, this money came from this person if there was some kind of investigation in place. But they're not going to make any huge effort or go out of their way.
I mean, look, Binance have had the option to sort of to become regulated a number of times. I've with a colleague of mine interviewed CZ, and the rhetoric was very clear. It was like, listen, we're not domiciled anywhere, we're not subject to anyone's laws, and I guess that's how you make $1 billion profit in your first year of operations. But yeah.
So when it comes to privacy coins, we know, for example, now, especially in the US, they're talking more and more about regulating cryptocurrency. Will it ever be possible to regulate privacy coins?
No, I don't think so.
But I feel that some people still don't want to use it because they'd have a tendency of feeling that, well, if I'm using this, it means I have something to hide. So it seems that they're still being used for more illegitimate transactions.
I mean, it's the same kind of like argument as, listen, like, is a VPN bad? Like, are you, like, because you're using a VPN, does it automatically mean that you sort of have some kind of malicious intent, or do you care about your privacy?
Of course.
They're sort of two sides to the coin, you know what I mean?
Especially in countries where there's a lot of repression and they need some ways to transfer funds.
Precisely.
And now that brings me to my last question, which is totally relevant to the iGaming industry. Would it be interesting for gaming sites to actually accept privacy coins, or does that go against regulators such as the MGA or the UKGC?
Yeah, accepting privacy coins is the equivalent of shooting yourself in the foot in the gaming industry. I mean, you can do it, it's just not really advisable.
Thank you very much, Jean-Michel Azzopardi, CCO of Infrinity, for discussing privacy coins with us today. We will see you next time in a new episode of DeepTech.